the Jim Bakker Show, coming to you from the village of Morningside, snuggled in the beautiful Ozark Mountains. Today, Jim's special guest, Dr. Bruce Fife.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Grace Street. So glad to have you here. And we're so excited to have Dr. Bruce Fife back with us today. ND, and he is amazing. He's a man who's full of his subject. I'll tell you what, and it's coconut, right?
That's right.
You eat coconut, right?
Yep.
So you are full of your subject. But you are an amazing man. And when I begin to research Alzheimer's and how to stop it, there wasn't any answers. Just hardly any answers, hardly any hope. But I started reading your books. I read a few MDs, and especially the lady doctor I read. That was one of the books. The lady that you helped. Yep. I don't remember her name, but she actually called you about coconut. In fact, when you started, there was hardly anybody even selling coconut oil. Is that right?
That's correct. When I wrote my first book, I couldn't find a source for coconut oil, and I had to look really hard, and I found like 3 sources where people could get it by mail order. Those are the only places in the United States and Canada that I could find, and that was back in 2000. Now, you go anywhere, you go to your grocery store, your health food store, you'll see not only one brand, but 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 brands, and then on the internet, there's lots of coconut oil available now too. So I'm really thrilled with how much coconut oil has come into our society.
You told us yesterday about a lady MD whose husband, he started Alzheimer's at 53. And amazing things. There was really no hope. And yet she was doing a trial medication. Tell us that story quickly, just overview.
She had tried all the conventional medications and they've run out, they didn't work. And so she was so desperate, she started looking for experimental medicines that researchers were trying to develop on Alzheimer's. And so she found one that showed particular promise, and so she went to sign him up to participate, but he was rejected because he was so far advanced in his Alzheimer's. And so in her research...
She said he wasn't communicating hardly at all in any way.
Well, he couldn't read anymore. He couldn't type on the keyboard. And so his communication skills, he couldn't spell anymore. So his communication skills, were way down. But this new study, or this new drug that she found, she actually did research and found the patent application. And in this application, it actually had the formula for the drug, and what the active ingredient in this drug was fats derived from coconut oil, medium-chain fatty acids from coconut oil. Oh. And that, she went and, since they were rejected from this study, she went to the health food store and just bought a bottle of coconut oil and started giving him the amount of medium-chain fatty acids that they were given in the studies from the coconut oil. And immediately, that day, he was starting to get better because they took him to the doctor, he took the tests, and he scored much higher on these tests than they'd had before.
How many things do you think it affects?
It affects the entire body. I mean, when I started doing my research, I was amazed at all the studies, at all the different parts of the body. I mean, coconut oil has antimicrobial properties, so it'll help protect you from infectious disease. It improves digestion. It has anti-cancer properties, so it'll help protect you against cancer. It helps balance blood sugar, so it'll help protect you against diabetes. And again, the brain effect, it helps boost brain power and protect against Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, strokes, and any other neurological type of problems. And there's much more, so much more. I had to write 20 books to describe it all.
Amazing.
Wow. Is it true? Because we read it in the New York Times, a month ago? Would you say that it's they called it type 3 diabetes in New York Times, the medical doctors. What do you think of that?
That's exactly right. They have learned that Alzheimer's is actually a form of diabetes. It's brain diabetes. The brain has become insulin resistant, and they call it type 3 diabetes now.
It's amazing. So tell us about some other people that you know you have, or they just read your books and they've written you or something, or you know them?
Well, there's this other man, Bruce. In fact, he was a retired pastor. And he actually got an infection, a fungal infection in his heart, and he went to the hospital for that. And to treat this, it was very difficult because there aren't really many effective drugs to treat fungal infections. And the fungal infection spread to other parts of his body, including his brain. And so it started eating away at his brain. Well, after weeks in intensive care, he finally conquered the infection, but as a result, it left him with dementia, severe dementia. And the doctor told his wife, Carol, that basically it was permanent. There was nothing you could do about it. He recommended that she put him in an institution because he was so far gone. In fact, he took what's known as the MMSE test, and he scored 11. 11 is right at the edge of being severely demented, very severe. And so his wife, just couldn't allow him to be institutionalized, so she took him home. And he was at the point where he couldn't communicate. He would try to talk, but it would come out in babbles. So he couldn't even complete a sentence. And so the communication was very poor there. Well, it's interesting because after a few months, she was getting very desperate for help. And so she actually, knelt down and prayed to God for help. What can I do? Show me the way to help my husband. Well, interestingly enough, the very next day on Facebook, she got a new friend. And her friend said, have you ever tried coconut oil? And gave her a link to the doctor that I mentioned that treated her husband. And there was a video. And so she went there and looked at that and said, all right, there's hope. And what was interesting also is that 2 weeks before, on a whim, she bought a jar of coconut oil. She didn't know why she bought the jar of coconut oil, but she bought it, she brought it home and put it on her shelf and never even touched it. And in fact, she even forgot she even had it until she watched this video. And so after watching the video, she went, got the jar, gave her husband a couple of teaspoons or a couple tablespoons of the oil. She says that within 3 hours, he was making complete sentences, no longer was babbling, was talking intelligently. Within 3 hours, his brain was in a state of insulin resistance, so it could not absorb glucose. And so even though he had glucose in his body, the brain was starving, degenerating, and dying. But the coconut oil provided the energy, and the way it did this is through ketones.
Okay, what's that mean, ketones? Tell us what that is.
It's very important. Our brain cells use glucose as its primary source of fuel. But when you don't eat, particularly if you don't eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar level is going to come down. But our brain cells need energy 24 hours a day, so it needs an alternative source of fuel. Ketones provide this alternative source of fuel. Normally, the liver will produce ketones when blood sugar levels start going down. And so you always have either glucose or ketones to keep the brain alive. Now, in Alzheimer's disease, since the brain has become insulin resistant, it cannot absorb the glucose. So when you have glucose high in your blood, your brain is suffocating, basically. It's starving, it's dying. And only when you have the ketones in does it have the nutrients to keep going and keep plugging along. Well, the thing with coconut oil, the marvelous thing with coconut oil in this aspect is that the unique fats in coconut oil, the medium-chain fatty acids, when you eat them, a portion of those will automatically be converted into ketones. And so coconut oil is literally a brain food. It will supply the nutrients that the brain has. So if you have, and they're not affected by insulin resistance. The brain cells will absorb ketones easily to provide the energy the brain needs.
This is amazing. Kevin's over here with his own jar of coconut oil
I'm
now.
gonna eat a jar a day
He's
because
like,
he's eating it like it's ice cream.
Okay,
Everything
so-
you mention, I have.
Now, is it so like for people with diabetes,
Diabetes is a big problem, and coconut oil is wonderful for diabetics. If you add it into your food, it will help balance your blood sugars because it slows down the absorption of the sugars into your bloodstream. So it helps keep your blood sugars at an even keel. Plus, it improves insulin secretion and insulin sensitivity. And this is really important because type 2 diabetes, which is 90% of diabetics, are insulin resistant. Coconut oil helps sensitize, or in other words, helps reverse insulin resistance.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. Listen.
Changing my life.
I think he is.
Carbs, carbohydrates,
Right.
are probably your biggest enemy. The sugar, we're eating tons of sugar.
Yeah.
I mean, I piled it up here one day, the sugar we average eat in a year. And carbohydrates, I think, is my biggest problem because the bread's filled with carbohydrates, even good bread's filled with carbohydrate, and these carbs. How many carbs are in coconut?
Well, that's a good thing about coconut because the carbs are actually very low. It's very high in fiber. Now, fiber is a type of carb, but we can't absorb it, so it doesn't affect blood sugar levels, so it's actually a good carb. And the absorbable carbs are very low, so coconut products are a low-carb food.
So it's feeding your brain where sugar is killing your brain. You understand that?
Yeah.
And people say, oh, we're not supposed to eat coconut because there was this big lie that came out way back when, I don't know, that it was a bad fat, that coconut was a bad fat. Cannot find anything bad about coconut. I'm sure somebody has it.
Well, you're exactly right, because coconut oil got a bad rap because coconut oil is primarily a saturated fat, and so people just associate all saturated fats are bad, so coconut oil has to be bad. But coconut oil is different from other fats. It's different from other saturated fats. It is a good fat. It helps protect against heart disease, and when I was doing my research, studying just about every study that was ever published, reading through that, there is no studies that show that coconut oil promotes heart disease. In fact, just the opposite. The studies show that coconut oil helps protect against heart disease.
Ketones, then, is a superfood. Would you call it a superfood?
It is definitely a superfood.
Because we love superfoods around here. We want to make everything we can. In fact, we're going to serve the audience today some soup that our chefs have just made.
Yes.
And what kind of soup are we going to serve, Sasha?
Cream of asparagus.
Lori?
Yes, coconut cream.
Coconut cream
Thank you.
soup.
All I can tell you is I just had a taste.
We
and
want
it's
an
amazing.
intelligent audience, so we're going to feed you some coconut cream soup. Here's the thing. I read in your book, I know I did, that they ease inflammation. Inflammation is our enemy, people. Do you know that?
Yes.
I've seen the word cancer linked with inflammation. Am I right, doctor?
You're correct.
So help me with this. Ketones ease inflammation, oxidative stress, and other common elements of neurological disorders. Quote from your book.
One of the characteristics of Alzheimer's is chronic inflammation of the brain. In fact, that's one of the causes of insulin resistance is that when you have inflammation leads to insulin resistance. So when you have chronic inflammation in the brain, you have chronic insulin resistance. And the ketones calm down the inflammation. Ketones do a lot of things. Ketones also improve blood flow to the brain. So they improve circulation and oxygen delivery to the brain. Another thing that ketones do, and this is really fascinating, ketones actually provide the basic lipid or fat building blocks for new brain cells. Believe it or not, much of your brain is made from ketones. When you were a fetus and during the first few months of your life, your body was actually in a state of ketosis, high blood ketones. And this was necessary because this is the time of period in your life where your brain grows the most. And so you need the ketones as the building blocks for your brain. Now, even as adults, we still need ketones coming into our brain to repair and replace dead and discarded brain cells. So you need ketones for good brain health.
You say ketones have an anti-cancer effect. How does it do that?
One of the interesting things about cancer is it can't live without sugar. It needs glucose or sugar. So when you're eating sugar, you're feeding
so that
cancer.
Soda pop you're eating is really good for you.
We eat far more sugar now than we have ever done in the past. I think it's around 160 pounds a year of sugar,
Right.
which is awful, and per person.
Yeah.
And so this all feeds cancer. And the thing about ketones is ketones are an alternative source of fuel for the body, but cancer cells cannot live on ketones. Your cells can. They can absorb ketones and live just fine, healthy lives, but cancer cannot. Cancer will starve in the presence of ketones.
Wow.
Why don't we want to do some things that would help our bodies to fight disease and all? We can do it. And that's why even the pH of your water can be important. So, but I love this point here in your book. Ketones not only stop the degeneration of your nervous system, but can also restore lost function. That's a great statement.
That's wonderful, particularly if you have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease, or if you suffered a stroke or have had some traumatic brain injury. Ketones, as I mentioned, they go to the brain and they trigger the healing processes in the brain. Glucose does not trigger healing processes of the brain. They will feed the brain cells, but they do not encourage the healing processes that ketones do. So you need to have ketones coming into your brain periodically to clean up and heal the brain.
Ketones and coconut oil affect the brain health. There's just no question about it.
Coconut oil is the ideal brain food. You often hear of fish being a brain food, but
Right.
ketones really, or coconut oil, really is God's brain food, because they literally are converted into food for the brain and do so much for the brain in helping protect the brain from degeneration and from damage and from inflammation.
And we are destroying our brain with the food we are eating. And when I found out that they believe Alzheimer is environmental, they really, because there's countries that hardly have any Alzheimer's.
Exactly.
Have you learned that in your studies, I'm sure?
That's exactly right. There are things that promote Alzheimer's. We really know what causes Alzheimer's. You know, the general medical profession kind of considers it a genetic disease, but that's just an excuse they give when they don't know what causes something or how to treat it. But if you research it, you can find things that lead up to Alzheimer's. And one of those things is a high-carb, high-sugar diet combined with a source of inflammation. For example, there are many things in our environment that can cause brain inflammation. Let me name off just a few of the common ones. One is trauma, or hitting your head somehow. Car accidents, falling down. There was a study that was done on soccer players that showed that professional soccer players, after they've retired, have a high incidence of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And the reason is for bouncing the ball on their head. I mean, even though that's not a very traumatic amount of pressure, over time it has caused or led to Alzheimer's. Another thing would be many drugs that we take also cause inflammation in the brain. Just recently, there was a study that came out that showed that antidepressants cause hemorrhaging in the brain. Well, hemorrhaging is always associated with inflammation.
Yes.
And lots of the common drugs that even over-the-counter drugs, can cause inflammation in the brain. You've got also environmental toxins, pesticides, herbicides. There was a study that showed that people who live within 500 meters of a farm that annually throws pesticides are much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. Other things are food additives. A lot of commercial food has these chemical additives. MSG is a big one. Aspartame or NutraSweet. Nitrates and nitrites, some of the chemical food dyes can cause inflammation. In fact, there's a name for some of these. They're called excitotoxins because they excite the brain cells into such a feverish state of activity that they burn themselves out. It's like a power surge coming through your computer. It burns out the circuits. It does the same thing to our brain. So every time you eat food that contains MSG, you're actually blowing brain cells. And the more you eat this type of food, the more brain cells are going to die. Also, you've got heavy metals, mercury, lead. How many people have amalgam fillings? The silver fillings are actually mercury fillings, 50% mercury in those. They are releasing mercury into your body continually. And mercury is the most toxic metal that we know of. And it's going to your brain and causing damage. Infections can cause damage to the brain. And of course, if you've got an infection in the brain, that's going to cause inflammation. So there's several ways that we can have inflammation in the brain. And when that's combined with a low-carb diet, that can lead to Alzheimer's because high-carb diets don't allow ketones to be produced.
High-carb diets don't allow ketones to be produced.
So if you're eating a lot of sugar, a lot of sweets, a lot of processed carbs, your body's not going to be producing the ketones that your brain needs. And so you need to do things that produces ketones. So what are those? Those are, one, you could fast. Fasting will produce ketones because your blood sugar levels are going to come down. Periodically fasting. So even just skipping one meal would be good, or 2 meals would be great, and do it on a periodic level. Another thing would be eating a low-carb diet. So cut down your carbs, and then your body's going to produce more ketones. And then a third way to do this, and this is the interesting one, is you can eat coconut oil because the fats in coconut oil will be converted automatically into ketones regardless of even if you're eating carbs.
And we're starting out with Stop Alzheimer's Now. This is your biggest book I think you've ever written. It's a large size, and because we're going to give you this book. This has all the information he's giving and a lot more. It's not just Alzheimer's, but this book is built around that. But then we talked about the oil pulling therapy that is amazing. I use this every day. And you say, when can I put something? Some of you would be good just to put in your mouth. Shut your mouth for 15 minutes. You'd stay out of trouble for at least 15 minutes, No, but what I do in the morning, before I take the shower, I put the coconut oil in my mouth. I put it on my tongue. I swoosh it through my teeth, like you say in your book. And this book will tell you all of what it does. And it has so much because it affects the whole body. The infections in the mouth and all. While I take the shower, I just keep it in my mouth during that whole time.
He'll come home from work, what he'll do, because I've been home a lot lately, he'll come home, and the minute he comes home, the first thing he does is he goes by his sink and he just takes a spoon and just puts the coconut oil in his mouth, so that I'm like, honey, how was your day? What happened at the ministry today? I wonder what's going on at the ministry. No. Yeah, he doesn't have to talk. And I want to know everything, because I've been laying in bed all day and I don't know what's going on at the ministry. I want to know.
No.
But he's sitting there swishing around.
No. Let me tell you though, you got to know the reason.
No, it is funny because it's every single day.
We're in the final weeks of the Old Mill Inn. We're going to open it up next week.
Yes.
And the Old Mill's where you're going to be able to get all these products and come here.
So basically, I've only seen you on the set. I did see you on Easter Sunday. That was nice.
And and while I'm sleeping, you see me. No, but so there's so much dust in the old mill because we're building it. They're sawing, they're sweeping, and I wear a mask part of the time. But, you can't wear a mask all the time because I'm eating over there too. And I get so, allergy. You remember the Dristan ads from way back?
Yeah.
I feel like a Dristan ad from the old day. And I'm feel like my sinuses are exploding. I feel like I'm going to come down with pneumonia again.
He used to. When I first met him, every single January, this guy had pneumonia in his
but
lungs.
I'm allergic to a lot of
He's
stuff.
allergic to everything.
So what I do,
to
I'm
life.
serious. I take a spoonful. I take a big spoonful. I'm sorry. I like a lot. You know, it won't kill me, right? No. So I take a whole big, and you put it under your tongue, you swish it through your teeth, and I'm telling you, before God, within 20, 30 minutes, less, it starts draining, opening up the sinuses, and
it does.
Honestly,
Kevin's over here in awe.
I wouldn't tell you if it wasn't true.
I wish I could.
Try it yourself.
I wish I had a camera right behind me so you could see
And
Kevin's
all that
reactions.
infection is, how can it happen so quickly? Do you know what it does?
Well, basically what it does, the reason why it's called oil pulling is because it pulls out bacteria, viruses, fungi, mucus, plaque, pus, all these toxins. It's pulling out of your mouth. And this pulling action also loosens up the sinuses. And so the sinuses start flowing easier, and it cleans them out. And then you spit it out because it's full of toxins and garbage. So spit it out in the garbage, and it cleans up your mouth. And as the result of that, you get cleaner teeth, you get fresher breath. It helps tighten up your gums around teeth. It helps with dental decay or with deep-seated infection. It pulls all of that out so your whole mouth health improves.
You know, I saw Hoda doing this. Honestly, I watched on TV. I think it was last week on your show, the one you like, Kathy Lee, because she's a Christian girl. And you're doing it right now. Oh, good. She's not going to tell. I have my whole show to myself. What am I going to do? But Hoda, on the Today Show, you know who Hoda is, don't you? Kathy.
Hoda copy, Kathy.
And so she was doing pulling. And she was swearing by it. She says, I don't even know for sure what it does. She says, but I know it cleans my teeth. It cleans my mouth and gum. But the thing that convinced me is when I read the studies on the autopsies from Alzheimer patients and dementia patients, and that a big percentage of them had infections in their gums and their mouths, and it's so near the brain. You see your brain's right there, your mouth's right here. And they felt that there's maybe some relationship to the infection in the mouth to Alzheimer's.
There is in lots of cases, because remember, infection is one of the causes of inflammation. So inflammation and a high-carb diet will lead to Alzheimer's. And it's interesting because in these cases, they've actually taken the bacteria from the Alzheimer's patients. They've done DNA testing on it and traced it back to bacteria that it is in their mouth. So they know absolutely for sure that the bacteria that was eating away on their brain came from their mouth. Well, oil pulling will prevent dementia in these cases, definitely just from that.
So you get this book.
Start pulling, Kevin, right now.
Oil pulling.
Now, I read a pamphlet in my dentist office about connected to heart attacks too, as well. Heart disease in your mouth, right? So
exactly.
It's not just the brain, but the heart.
Oh, my lens, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, because when you clean out the mouth, you're actually affecting the entire body. Our mouth isn't separated from the health of the rest of the body. What's happening is when you have bacteria in your mouth, it's seeping into your bloodstream all the time. And this bacteria can go to your heart. It can go to your joints and cause arthritis. It can go to your liver or your kidneys or your brain. It can migrate anywhere. And this is a well-known fact. In my book, Oil Pulling Therapy, I document this with published medical studies. When you go to the dentist, if you've had a heart problem, and when he starts working on your mouth, he prescribes antibiotics because he knows that some of that's going to get in the bloodstream and it's going to go and affect your heart and can cause heart failure. This is absolutely known for sure. It can also go to your joints and cause arthritis or anywhere else in your body. So when you do oil pulling, not only are you improving the health of your mouth, but you're improving the health of your entire body because you're removing the focus, the source of this bacteria.
Let me tell you what, Kevin, you're overwhelmed, aren't you?
Well, it makes me love Jesus even more. He had the answer all along.
He
We
did.
didn't-
Amen.
In the
Rolling down a
coconut
tree.
that he created. No man could do that.
Kevin he just mouthed over to us without the mic. He said, "This is changing my life."
Well, it is.
This information that you're giving to us today, Dr. Fife, has the ability, literally, to change your life. To change. You know what I keep thinking? All I can think about is all my loved ones and all the people I care about. I just want to get them this information as fast as I possibly can.